Money Radio, discussing the business of making and spending money.
The transmission company of Nigeria celebrated 400 days, at least that's more than a year and then some, about 4 days. In addition of grid stability, the country was again thrown into darkness following a total system collapse on Tuesday. So we are going to discuss and to be throwing lights on how can we find lasting solution to these perennial grid collapses. Instead, once again, I want to find out, just before we go into the program, what is actually meant by grid collapses, because many Nigerians don't actually know what it entails. Many people just feel that, oh, the grid that has been supplying lights to everybody, to everywhere, has blackened out. Is that the true situation?
Yeah, when a grid collapses,
yeah,
it can be a partial or a full collapse.
Yeah, like what are we actually referring to when we say grid
okay,
collapse?
The grid is a network of electrical connections,
okay,
of transmission lines connecting to generating stations.
Okay.
So what the transmission arm of the electricity supply tripod does is to move electricity from the generating companies to the distributing companies. So it sits
so
right
transmission now is actually a middle.
Yes, it is. It's actually in the middle of the tripod.
Okay.
So when and the grid, the national grid, is domiciled with the transmission company.
Okay.
So they coordinate the power that is generated and then distribute it to the various distribution companies who now allocate it down to different homes and offices. So when you say that the national grid has collapsed, it means that the network of transmission system has either fully collapsed or partially collapsed, in which case power cannot be transmitted from the generation companies to the distribution companies.
Very, very interesting, quite interesting, because prior to this one, people just feel that, oh, there is a trap, or just as you said, maybe a tree, a Christmas tree, so to speak. So it just collapsed and there's no light. Now, when it collapses, what does it entail?
What it entails is that the generation companies that are connected to the transmission infrastructure generation cannot get into the system for onward transmission. On the other side, it could be that there's some kind of problem with either some of the generation companies, so they are not generating, because what happens is that the system, I am meant to understand, works with certain voltage, it has certain limits that it requires to have a sort of stability, and it is this stability that it needs to be able to function optimally. And then when some of the generation companies have issues and they cannot send in power as they ought to, and then the stability of the distribution system is compromised, then there can be a partial or a total grid collapse. Also, at other times, it could be some challenges within the infrastructure itself. Maybe too many, the load that is on it, the load came in too much, and the system did not have the capacity to carry it, and so you see where the system just gives in. It can't take the load, so it collapses. So it's two ways: either the load is too small for it to be stable, or it's too much. In both cases can lead to a collapse of the grid.
Okay, thank you. Now, in his press statement while announcing the grid collapse, the statement emanating from the transmission company did say that we've enjoyed 400 days of uninterrupted supply, and I begin to wonder how is that, because we still live in a zone that we don't have light maybe for some hours of time. So how is that?
Yeah, the TCN has actually not said anything concerning the current grid collapse.
Yes.
But before now, yes, in barely 2 weeks ago, the TCN had actually rolled out the drums to celebrate
400.
Yes, 400 years of grid stability. And for them, that was
but that has not translated to some homes having had light.
Yeah, that the grid did not collapse is not synonymous with every yeah, because
why is that?
now it depends on the demand for power and what Nigeria is currently generating. Nigeria is still generating far below the power demand that the country needs, and so with that mega generation, whether the grid is stable or not, what is transmitted to the distribution companies is still very small, marginal compared to the need of the society. So that the grid did not collapse, but the grid didn't collapse for over 400 days, but they transmitted what was on the grid to the generation companies, and that was grossly inadequate. So that is why in the homes, offices, and businesses, we still find that there wasn't enough supply.
Yes, there wasn't enough supply.
Yes,
now, what can be done to have more power generated?
You know, the issue of this grid collapse has been a perennial one, which in fact, at a point, it was like every other day or every other,
like last year,
yes,
it was several times.
Yes, several times within a single month, you see the grid collapsing and all that. That's combined with the fact that Nigeria has perennially not been able to generate enough, and so many of the experts are thinking in the line that Nigeria, as vast as Nigeria is, does not really need to depend solely on one national grid. There's been a lot of investment. The government, of course, the TCN that houses the transmission company is still domiciled with the federal government, so it's still 100% federal government owned company, and so as a result of that, there's no opportunity for private sector investment to come in. The only way private sector investment or private monies can come in is when the government borrow to fund upgrades in the sector, which in the system, which it has done, and which somehow have still not translated to having increased capacity. The capacity of the grid still stands at about 7,000. In fact, it's less than 7,000, about 5,000 megawatts of electricity, and Nigeria has still been hovering around 4,000 megawatts for as long as I can recall. So that, and for a country that is still growing, businesses are coming up, houses are developments have sprung in so many different areas. You have in some places where in fact there were no houses. Many areas have sprung up, estates and all that, and all these get connected to the same national grid. So while the electricity, the power requirement has been skyrocketing, if I can put it that way, the generation capacity has remained static and even dwindling. So
yes, dwindled last
year.
Yes,
Dwindling. And so the general idea is that Nigeria doesn't need to depend on a single national grid. There is a need for mini grids all over the country to be able to boost up the level of power generation within the country.
No, thank you so much. Now, listen, there is this talk that private government owned enterprises, they don't do well when it's compared to when it's privatized and all those stuff. Are you of that school of thought that government is not doing business or has no business doing business? Because we've seen that, like you rightly pointed that this transmission company of Nigeria is still held by Nigeria and it's not be able to live up to desired expectations. What should be done? This like thing that away from electricity now, let me just take on a general landscape. Federal government should have its assets privatized so that it can function well.
Yeah, we have that is the general idea that government has no business doing.
But another school of thought said no, federal government should do business, but do it pragmatically with the aim of making profit out of it.
Yes, of course. But you see, the issue of power in Nigeria, I really don't understand what is the root cause. I think the major the major responsibility of this new administration is really to sit down and find out what the root cause of Nigeria's power challenge is, so that they can find a more lasting solution to it. Because before 2008, the clamor was that let's privatize the power sector. That when the power sector is privatized, there's going to be much more. It will improve the power system and improve power generation. And so, because of that, we saw the generation arm of it being completely privatized. And then we saw a whole new private sector investors coming into the generation arm. And then the distribution facilities, government still owns 40%. So it means that the private sector holds the bulk of majority shares in the distribution infrastructure. So we would have thought that this would bring results in fresh investments in the sector, and then we will see improvement. Because even as it is, when so much power is generated, many of the distribution companies will tell you they don't have capacity to take them all. And so you see a situation where there is power loss. The power is generated, it's not transmitted, but it cannot be distributed because the infrastructure is not there. And this is the failing of the distribution companies who took over this asset.
No, if I'm a button, that means the distribution company capacity to distribute this power.
Of course, many of the distribution companies lack adequate capacity to distribute.
Yeah, the federal government is not doing anything about it.
Of course, and this is born out of the fact that the federal government still owns shares in these distribution companies. So maybe that is where the distribution companies are, the private sector investors in these distribution companies are hiding under. After all, government still own part of the shares, and so they leave the bulk of the work for the federal government. In fact, at a point, they were actually collecting revenues and they were not doing anything. In fact, they were even owing the people, the distribution companies that distribute electricity for them to supply. So they were owing them, and those ones have their own businesses to run. They have to pay for gas, they have to pay for all other components that goes into their generation. And it became such a problematic situation that the central bank had to step in and kind of escrow their
We are going to be
accounts.
sharing more on that, because yes, actually I recall there was a federal government intervention through the CBN then on this dispute. We are going to continue our conversation when we come back from this short break. Don't go away, stay tuned.
Leadership TV for God and country.
The program is Morning Radio Energy Sector on Leadership Television. My name is Winifred Gbebo, and just before we went on break, we have in the studio our in-house analyst is the group business editor of Leadership newspaper, Inse Anthony Uko. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
And yes, before we went on break, there were some interventions made by the suspended CBN governor, Emefiele, in the acting on the disputes. And of course, Inse was just sharing light on that before we went on break. Inse, probably you have to continue where you left off. I recall that there was a CBN's intervention that time on the disputes. So
Yes.
how did it end?
Yeah, the central bank has had in the past come in so many times in making interventions in order to stabilize the distribution arm. And this was as a result of the distribution companies not generating enough to be able to pay off electricity that is supplied to them. And then the central bank had to come in, because if the electricity value chain works like this, the generation companies will generate, send the power to the transmission, then the transmission will send it to the distribution companies who are supposed to distribute it
To whom?
So they are like, while the generation
consumers.
companies are the producers, the distribution companies are the supermarkets who are supposed to collect the money and then send it back into the system, and the system uses that money and the chain continues. But where the generation company generates, the power is transmitted to the distribution companies, and they are not able to recover revenue. That means their monies
on the power generated.
on power generated. That means they will not be able to fund another cycle of production, and so it is stalled at that level. And this is where the central bank has been intervening to ensure the smooth running of that value chain. And it got to a point, it got so worse that the generation company said if they were not being paid, they would just have to stop generating. And then the distribution companies, on the other hand, were claiming they were not the consumers to be able to pay, until this central bank had to step on their accounts and block their accounts and say the distribution companies cannot spend from their accounts. It is the CBN that will administer what happens to the monies that goes into their accounts. So the CBN actually took over the administration of the funds so that they can pay those they borrowed from, they can pay the electricity generators so that they can,
generate more,
and so on. And in fact, because of all this defaults by the distribution companies, we saw a lot of the debtors, those whom they collected money to buy the assets, coming in and taking over those assets. Like we saw last year, about 5 of the distribution companies were taken over by those who brought out the funding for them to be purchased several years after. And so that is where we are, the issue of mismanagement of funds within the sector. And many stakeholders have attributed this to the continuous involvement of government.
So why won't government just absorb?
Yes, that is the question. When it comes to transmission, the argument there, which somehow you just have to find a reason with them, is that distribution is a national security issue. If this distribution, the transmission is put into the hands of some private entities, they can actually hold the nation to ransom. They can actually shut down the transmission infrastructure and throw the entire nation into darkness and hold the nation to ransom. So as a result of that, they've been very reluctant.
We saw that during late Abacha that time when they went on strike. And of course, Abacha had them executed also.
I really can't recall.
I recall there was an incident that happened that they went on strike and threw the nation into darkness.
So something like that could happen, and it could lead to, imagine many of the military operations that depend on the national grid for their power supply. Then some people could just take that.
I can understand the fears.
Yes,
but
so
nevertheless, they're supposed to, like, maybe this distribution aspect, they can just also hands off.
Yes, that is where a lot of the clamor has been on. That okay, if for security reasons you can't answer the transmission, what about the distribution? Why not let it go 100% to the private sector, so that the private sector will see this as a business that they have to run and run profitably, like we see with many of the generation companies that are running their own private businesses. They are profit oriented and they are value added oriented.
Now, just before we go, because time is running against us, how can Nigeria overcome this perennial issue of the national grid collapse?
Good a thing, we would say that this administration started on a footing that many Nigerians see as going to be a game changer with the passing of the Electricity Act 2023. Before now, the power to generate electricity has been fully domiciled with the federal government. And with the passing of the Electricity Act, this power has been devoluted, whereby the states are already in the process of beginning. They are putting their houses in order. The act stipulates what they need to do, how they need to set up structures that will allow them to be able to administer a distribution, a power generating and distribution operations within their states. So they are already doing this. So that is what experts are saying, that there is every need to encourage the full implementation of provisions in the electric as it currently is. Imagine a situation where there are mini grids all scattered all around the country. Let's say, for instance, just take the 6 geopolitical zones. Then you have mini grids in those areas that cater to the needs of the states within the region. So you will find a situation where, even though power is still being generated at the national level, the grid is not being overburdened. And where a situation like the national grid has an issue, all the grids will not collapse at the same time if they are different.
But at the end of the day, don't you think when the states or region come up with their own national grid, just like what you said, this Electricity Act, then what would the national grid be catering to? FCT?
The FCT is there, and then there are many national agencies, parastatals. There are so many, and even right now, because of the power wastage that occurs because of lack of infrastructure, there's even an arrangement where the generation companies can sell directly to high-end consumers, like industries, like industrial clusters and all that. So where there is still,
is the arrangement already in place?
The arrangement is
being proposed.
That arrangement has been in place, but I think before now the system was abused. So the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission had to step it down for the guidelines to be fine-tuned.
Perhaps it would be nice, because these are manufacturers companies complain.
Of course. In fact, the manufacturers say that they lose up to 10 trillion annually to profits, and that translates to about 2% of Nigeria's GDP. So imagine a situation where there is a more stable electricity supply. There will be the manufacturers will be able to perform their operations more smoothly, and the bulk of what is used is spent on alternative power generation will be reduced, and you find out at the end of the day some of these costs that is passed on to the consumers will reduce. So there's a whole lot of benefits to having this Electricity Act implemented.
Why is there delay in the implementation, in fine-tuning the act, so to speak?
No, the act is already in place.
No, talking about this direct.
The direct sale.
The high-end user.
I really do not know. It's the neck.
Because we keep getting reports of manufacturers complaining about ease of doing business, the issues, whereas this could also help in alleviating some of the hardships.
I think it's the abuse that came with it, and though when you ask NEC, they will tell you that that eligible electricity consumer that is still in place. So but they are just working out the modalities. So but they've been on that for a long time.
Yes, still coming. Thank you so much for your thoughts on today's energy sector program, Money Radio. We've been talking about the topic will be on finding lasting solution to perennial national grid collapse in Nigeria. And it's Anthony Oko. Until same time next week, we'll have you again on the program. This is Winifred Igbebo wishing you a beautiful week ahead. Bye.
Thank you for watching. For sponsorship and advert placements, please contact 080-3688-6158. Last Word Leadership Podcast Studio. You have the